behind the polished glow of perfectionism, behind its gleaming surface of discipline and high standards, lies a fear, ancient, paralyzing, and rarely understood. It is not simply the fear of failure. It is far more subtle and terrifying. It is the fear of one's own power. Perfectionism is often celebrated. Society admires the one who strives for excellence, who refuses mediocrity, who demands the best of themselves and others. Perfectionists are praised as committed, responsible, detail-oriented. They wear the badge of high standards, like a medal of honor. But what if this constant pursuit of flawlessness isn't a noble trait at all? What if it's a mask, a disguise, a carefully constructed illusion designed not to express greatness, but to avoid it? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist whose insights continue to penetrate the depths of human psychology, saw perfectionism not as a virtue, but often as a defense, a sophisticated form of self-sabotage. According to Jung, the human psyche creates what he called the persona, the social mask we wear to gain approval and function in the world. But this mask, the more perfect and flawless it appears, often hides something much more complex, the part of us we dare not show. And among the most threatening of those hidden parts is not weakness, but greatness. Imagine someone who dreams of writing a novel, starting a business, or changing careers. They read all the books. They attend every course. They refine their idea endlessly. They're always almost ready, always still perfecting. But the truth is, they never begin. The draft remains unwritten. The business remains an idea. The career change remains a fantasy. Why? Because something is never perfect yet. But underneath the surface, it's not quality they fear. It's visibility. It's success, because success strips away the final excuse. It reveals what could have been done long ago. Jung understood this psychological mechanism well. He believed that the ego, the center of our conscious identity, is constantly defending itself from contents of the shadow, the unconscious realm where all the aspects of ourselves we don't want to face are buried. Often, we imagine the shadow as a repository of shame, trauma, and guilt. But Jung went further. He argued that the shadow also contains the brilliance we've repressed, not because it is evil, but because it is too great for the fragile ego to handle. Perfectionism becomes the elegant strategy that allows us to stay busy, but not exposed, to work endlessly, without risking anything real. It becomes a socially accepted way to hide in plain sight. I just want it to be the best it can be, we say, while silently hoping that day never comes. Because the moment we finish, the moment we release, we become accountable to our own potential. That, for many, is more frightening than failure itself. Here lies the paradox. Many perfectionists are not avoiding mistakes. They are avoiding recognition. Because with recognition comes expectation. With visibility comes judgment. With success comes the terrifying possibility of transformation. A life that is no longer small, quiet, or safe. And so the perfectionist remains in a liminal space, always preparing, never acting, always planning, never launching. It looks like discipline, but it is avoidance. It looks like commitment, but it is delay. And worst of all, it looks like virtue, but it may be the most dangerous form of spiritual stagnation. Jung reminds us that the psyche does not tolerate the suppression of vital energy for long. When the power we are meant to express is trapped behind the mask of perfection, it doesn't simply disappear. It turns inward. It becomes anxiety, self-criticism, chronic dissatisfaction. The energy meant to build, create, and lead instead festers as doubt and despair. This is the true cost of perfectionism, not the missed tasks, but the missed life. Perfectionism, then, is not just a habit, it is a defense. And like all defenses, it is built to protect something sacred. But in doing so, it also imprisons it. In the next chapter, we will explore this prison in greater detail. we will step beyond the persona and into the heart of the shadow, that vast and hidden terrain where not only our fears reside, but our greatness as well. For to understand the perfectionist, we must understand what they are truly afraid of, not being imperfect, but being fully alive. To understand the true nature of perfectionism, we must descend into the darker, hidden corridors of the psyche, into what Carl Jung called the shadow. It is here, in this murky realm of repressed fears, forgotten desires, and unclaimed strength, that perfectionism finds its roots. While the persona, the outward mask we show to the world, aims to be admired, the shadow contains all that we have disowned, including the very parts of ourselves that might make us truly powerful. For Jung, the shadow is not merely a container of flaws, vices, or shameful memories. That is a common misunderstanding. The shadow also holds gifts, talents, vision, power, but these aspects were deemed, at some point in life, too much, too intense, too risky, too different. And so they were pushed down, exiled from the conscious self, hidden behind socially acceptable roles. The perfectionist's persona, the disciplined achiever, the high performer, the flawless creator, becomes a fortress to keep this volatile, unpredictable inner world under control. But the shadow does not stay silent forever. Perfectionism, seen through this lens, is not just about neatness or high standards. It is a psychological defense mechanism, intricately built to keep the contents of the shadow from rising to the surface. The obsessive focus on refinement, the constant revisions, the not quite ready syndrome, all of it serves a deeper purpose: to delay the moment of exposure. Because what if the thing we create is brilliant? What if it moves people? What if it changes how we are seen, and even more frightening, how we see ourselves? The real terror for the perfectionist is not public failure. It is public power. Success would demand we stop hiding. It would force us to admit that we were capable all along, that the years of delay were not due to unpreparedness, but fear. This revelation cuts deeper than any criticism ever could. Jung wrote that the unconscious mind has its own intelligence, its own agenda. And when power, talent, or desire is repressed long enough, it begins to leak out in disguised forms. In the perfectionist, this often appears as chronic hesitation, self-doubt, or paralysis cloaked in productivity. A person may spend hours fine-tuning a presentation, a manuscript, a plan, all while quietly avoiding the one thing that truly matters: sharing it. This is the paradox. Perfectionism feels like control, but it is a form of captivity. It masquerades as diligence, but it is often anxiety in formalware. And what lies beneath that anxiety? The fear of the shadow. Not the grotesque, broken parts, but the glowing, wild, magnificent ones. The parts of ourselves that are so alive, so bold, so different from who we have pretended to be, that they threaten the identity we've worked so hard to maintain. Many perfectionists believe that they are simply not ready yet, but often this is a lie the unconscious tells to protect the ego. Because readiness, in truth, is an illusion. The idea that we must first perfect ourselves before stepping forward is a trap, one the shadow happily supports, because it keeps us small. Jung understood the cost of this strategy. The longer we refuse to meet the shadow, to acknowledge both our suppressed wounds and our suppressed power, the more this energy begins to sabotage us from within. The person who cannot launch their project, who abandons every opportunity at the last moment, who ends relationships before they deepen, these are not isolated actions. They are the shadow at work, holding us back from becoming who we truly are. And yet, society often rewards this behavior. Saying, "I'm not done because I want it to be perfect," is far more acceptable than saying, "I'm terrified of who I might become if I succeed." That is the brilliance of perfectionism. It hides the most existential fear in a socially praised behavior. But what happens to all the unexpressed energy? To all the ideas, gifts, and visions that remain locked away? Jung warned that what we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. In other words, the unlived life begins to manifest as frustration, anxiety, even depression. The person may appear to be achieving, but inside, they feel empty, unfulfilled, as if something essential is missing. Because something is. Within the perfectionist's shadow lies not only the truth of who they are, but the power to become who they might yet be. And that power, if not embraced consciously, will continue to haunt them unconsciously, appearing as fear, delay, and doubt. The good news is this: the shadow is not our enemy. It is our teacher. It holds the keys to authenticity, to creativity, to freedom, but only if we are willing to look. In the next chapter, we will examine the psychological and emotional consequences of remaining trapped in the cycle of perfectionism. For when the shadow is denied for too long, the soul begins to suffer, and the price, though invisible at first, is devastatingly real. From the outside, perfectionism often looks like an admirable trait. It's associated with discipline, ambition, excellence. People who hold themselves to high standards are applauded, rewarded, and respected. But what the world doesn't see, what even the perfectionist often refuses to see, is the psychological toll of this pattern. Beneath the polished exterior is a world of internal pressure, chronic tension, and quiet despair. Carl Jung warned us that everything we repress will eventually demand to be lived. That which is not brought into the light does not vanish. It festers. And in the case of the perfectionist, the most dangerous illusion is that they are in control. That if they just work a little harder, prepare a little longer, revise one more time, they will finally be ready. But ready never comes, because readiness is not the issue. Avoidance is. This creates what Jung called psychic stagnation, a state where the life energy meant to fuel creation, expression, and transformation becomes blocked. The person seems busy, but nothing meaningful is being birthed into the world. They are perpetually circling the runway, but never taking off. And this is exhausting, not because they are doing too much, but because they are doing everything except what truly matters. As time passes, this energetic congestion begins to manifest emotionally. Anxiety, self-doubt, insomnia, burnout. The perfectionist is haunted by the sense that they are falling behind, but they cannot name what exactly they are behind on, because they've never truly begun. They are haunted by their unlived potential, and the soul knows it. Jung said that suffering doesn't come from difficulty itself, but from living a life that isn't truly ours. The perfectionist may achieve external success, the promotions, the praise, the accolades, yet still feel hollow. Why? Because these achievements are often in service of the persona, not the true self. The goal is not authenticity, but approval. Not expression, but validation. And as long as the goal is to be seen as perfect, the self remains hidden. This disconnection from the inner world creates a subtle but corrosive effect. Life becomes performative. The perfectionist is always on stage, always filtering, always managing their image. Mistakes become unbearable, not because of their objective impact, but because they threaten the carefully crafted identity. Even small errors are experienced as personal failures, not learning opportunities. There is no space for experimentation, no margin for being human, and the toll extends beyond the self. Perfectionists often hold others to the same impossible standards they impose on themselves. Partners, friends, coworkers, everyone becomes part of the script. Disappointment is inevitable. Relationships suffer. Intimacy becomes difficult because true connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is incompatible with the perfectionist's need to appear flawless. The result is isolation, a deep and persistent loneliness made worse by the fact that, on the surface, everything appears fine. Jung's insights reveal an even deeper tragedy. The longer we deny our shadow, including our suppressed talents, creativity, and desire, the more likely it is to express itself destructively. This is why so many perfectionists end up self-sabotaging. Not consciously, not deliberately, but in quiet, subtle ways. A project is postponed indefinitely. An opportunity is declined at the last minute. A relationship is ended just before it becomes serious. All of this is the shadow saying, I'm not ready to step into who I could become. And underneath all these patterns lies a profound fear. What if I succeed and it changes everything? Because it will. Success, real success, demands responsibility. It brings exposure. It requires commitment to a new level of being. It forces us to leave behind the safety of our old identity. And for many, that cost feels too high. It's easier to stay small, to keep polishing, preparing, perfecting, indefinitely. But the cost of staying small is not just emotional or relational. It is existential. There is a moment in many perfectionists' lives, sometimes quiet, sometimes dramatic, when the awareness hits, I have wasted time. I have not lived fully. I have built a prison out of gold. And this realization is devastating, because it's not about what others think. It's about what the soul knows, that we were meant for more, and we've been hiding from it. Yet even in this despair, there is a hidden gift. The psyche never sends pain without purpose. Every symptom, every bout of anxiety, every restless night, every unfinished project is a message, a call to awaken, to begin living not the perfect life, but the real one. Jung believed that healing comes not from destroying the persona, but from integrating it, from bringing the shadow to light, from reclaiming the power we've buried in fear. The first step is not dramatic. It is humble. It is the simple, terrifying act of saying, I no longer need to be perfect. I only need to be real. In the next chapter, we will explore this turning point, the beginning of liberation. How we move from paralysis to action, from image to essence. How, by embracing our imperfection, we can finally step into our strength. There comes a moment, subtle or seismic, when the perfectionist's armor begins to crack. It may be triggered by exhaustion, burnout, a failed relationship, or simply the quiet grief of unlived potential. Whatever its form, it carries the same message. This is not working anymore. The persona, once so polished and proud, becomes too heavy to carry. The need for approval, once addictive, begins to feel hollow. And beneath it all stirs something ancient, insistent, and raw, the desire to be free. Freedom, however, is not what most perfectionists imagine it to be. It does not arrive through success, achievement, or mastery. It arrives through surrender, the moment one stops trying to control how they are seen, and instead chooses to be who they are. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming one's true self, is not an ascent into light, but a descent into the depths. It begins when we dare to confront not just our flaws, but our fantasies. The fantasy of perfection, the fantasy of control, the fantasy that if we just get it right, we will finally be safe, loved, untouchable. This moment of reckoning is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it demands we abandon the identity we've spent years constructing. Liberating because it reveals that this identity was never real to begin with. The perfectionist's image, the careful, curated, competent self, is a performance, a coping mechanism, a shield, and it has served a purpose. It may have helped them survive childhood expectations, cultural pressure, or early experiences of rejection. But now, in adulthood, it has become a cage, and the only way out is through imperfection. This is where healing begins, not with grand gestures, but with small, radical acts of truth. It begins the first time we publish something unfinished. The first time we say, "I don't know," without shame. The first time we disappoint someone and choose not to apologize for existing. These are not failures. They are initiations. They mark the turning point from living for image to living from essence. Essence does not strive. It simply is. It is the quiet, powerful part of the psyche that does not need validation because it already knows its worth. It does not compare, compete, or perfect. It creates, not to prove something, but because creation is its nature. This is the self that existed before the world taught us to be afraid. And to return to it is not easy, but it is necessary. Jung knew that integration requires courage. The perfectionist must face the parts of themselves they once disowned, their messiness, their uncertainty, their humanity. But in doing so, they also reclaim the parts they once feared were too much, their boldness, their intuition, their voice. And this voice, once released, changes everything. Because what the world needs is not more flawless people. It needs people who are willing to be real, who are willing to risk being misunderstood, imperfect, even rejected, in order to live with integrity. There is profound power in a person who no longer fears exposure, who no longer needs to hide behind the illusion of excellence, who can say, "This is my work, this is my truth, this is me, unfinished, evolving, and enough." That is the shift from image to essence, from performance to presence, from fear to freedom. And once this shift begins, it becomes irreversible. Life starts to reorganize itself. Creativity flows more freely. Relationships deepen. Boundaries become easier to hold. Decisions are made not from fear of judgment, but from alignment with values. The inner critic still speaks, but its voice loses authority. The perfectionist, once trapped by the need to be seen a certain way, discovers the joy of simply being. This is not to say the journey is smooth. The pull of the old persona is strong. The fear of not being enough doesn't vanish overnight, but something has changed. The war is no longer against the self. The energy once spent maintaining an illusion is now used to build something real. And slowly, a new identity begins to form, not as a mask, but as a reflection of the soul. In the final chapter, we will explore what lies beyond perfectionism, the life that becomes possible when we are no longer ruled by fear, and the deep, generative power that is unleashed when we finally trust who we are becoming. What lies beyond perfectionism is not chaos. It is not failure or mediocrity. It is not the collapse of ambition or the loss of discipline. What lies beyond perfectionism is wholeness, a way of living that is rooted not in fear, but in presence, not in self-protection, but in self-trust. Carl Jung once wrote, "I would rather be whole than good." And for the recovering perfectionist, this is a revolutionary idea. Because for so long, being good, being competent, impressive, ideal was the central pursuit. But wholeness is different. It includes the full range of who we are, the brilliant and the broken, the wise and the wounded, the messy, the magnificent, and the mundane. To become whole is not to be flawless. It is to no longer fear your own contradictions. It is to wake up one morning and realize that you no longer need to apologize for being tired or unsure or unfinished. It is to speak without rehearsing, to show up without polishing, to create without guaranteeing the outcome. This is what freedom feels like, not the absence of fear, but the absence of self-betrayal. The perfectionist once believed they had to earn their worth, that they had to do something extraordinary just to deserve rest, love, or peace. But wholeness reveals a different truth. You are already enough, not because you're perfect, but because you're human. In Jungian psychology, this arrival into authenticity is called individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself. distinct from collective expectations and unconscious conditioning. It's not a destination, but a path, a spiral, a deepening. And as we walk it, something beautiful happens. We begin to reclaim the very parts of ourselves we once rejected. The anger we suppressed becomes clarity and boundary. The sadness we avoided becomes compassion. The desire we shamed becomes creativity. Even the procrastination and paralysis we hated begin to make sense, not as character flaws, but as protectors, parts of the psyche that once believed safety could only be found in control. This shift doesn't just heal us, it transforms how we relate to others. We no longer demand perfection from partners, friends, or children. We stop measuring people by their performance and instead connect with them through their humanity. Vulnerability becomes not a threat, but a bridge. We forgive more easily, and we include ourselves in that forgiveness. From this place, work changes, art changes, leadership changes. We stop asking, "Will this be good enough?" and start asking, "Is this true?" We stop striving for impact and start honoring integrity. We stop hiding behind what we know and start experimenting with what we feel. This is not to say ambition disappears. It doesn't, but it matures. It becomes guided by soul, not ego. We are no longer driven by the need to prove ourselves. We are drawn by the desire to serve, to create, to contribute something real. And perhaps the greatest paradox is this. When we stop obsessing over being exceptional, we often become more powerful, more magnetic, more creative than ever before. Not because we are trying to be impressive, but because we are being honest. Carl Jung knew that the human being is not meant to be perfect, but whole. The perfectionist dreams of freedom, but only wholeness delivers it. Because only wholeness allows us to live without the mask, without the endless editing, without the fear of being truly seen. And in that raw, unguarded place, something ancient awakens, joy. Not the fleeting rush of validation, but the quiet, steady joy of being aligned with your essence. A joy that no praise can inflate and no criticism can diminish. This is the gift waiting beyond perfectionism. Not a perfect life, but a real one. Not constant achievement, but deep meaning. Not applause, but peace. So if you've spent your life chasing flawless, remember this. You were never meant to be a masterpiece. You were meant to be alive. And that, messy, miraculous, and real, is enough.